Welcome guys, Patrick here. When I think of vloggers chasing a viral moment, I imagine a camera and a clip worth posting. But these stories completely shatter that idea. From a woman who trusted a thermometer and stepped past the boardwalk at Yellowstone, to a comedian who stepped out of the car and squared up with a wild kangaroo, ending in the worst way possible. It was June 18th, 2017, and Yellowstone's backcountry was doing what it always does in late spring, sitting quietly under a wide blue sky while the ground beneath it stayed dangerous. The air smelled like sulfur. The terrain looked solid. It wasn't. Gwen Trask was 24, and she ran a small travel vlog from her apartment in Colorado. She had around 4,200 subscribers, not huge but growing, and she had built that audience on a specific kind of content. Places that felt hidden, slightly off the beaten path. The kind of spots that made viewers feel like they were being let in on something. She was sharp, personable on camera, and genuinely passionate about the outdoors. She was also watching her analytics closely, and she had noticed that geothermal content was pulling numbers. That mattered to her. She drove out to Yellowstone with two people she trusted, a friend who handled the camera, and another friend who appeared on screen with her occasionally. Neither of them were professionals. They were just people who showed up for her, the way friends do. The plan was something she had been calling a natural hot tub challenge. She had seen similar clips circulate online. She brought a handheld thermometer, which she believed would give her enough information to make a safe call. She had done her version of research. The problem is that Yellowstone's thermal features don't behave the way a backyard pool does, and a consumer thermometer doesn't tell you anything about what's happening 3 inches below the surface. They followed faint footpaths worn into the ground by previous visitors who had also stepped past the boardwalk barriers. The warning signs were there, the discolored ground was there, and her companion said something about it. She kept moving. She approached the edge of the thermal pool and tested it with one foot. The crust depressed under her weight and flexed in a way that should have ended the attempt right there. Instead, she shifted her weight to stabilize herself, and the crust gave way under her right leg, pulling her in up to the hip. She instinctively braced with her left foot to stop herself from going deeper. That second point of contact caused a wider collapse, and she sank to her waist. The water was superheated. The burns to her submerged lower body were immediate and severe. Her cameraman moved toward her and stopped when the ground began fracturing under his own feet. He grabbed a tripod and extended it toward her. The edge kept crumbling. It took multiple attempts over what investigators estimated was under a minute before they managed to drag her free. She could not stand. The burns across her lower body were extensive, with visible tissue damage. She was conscious and in severe pain. Her breathing was rapid. As shock began to set in, her speech became incoherent. Her companions called for help immediately, but they were off-trail in backcountry terrain and could not give responders a precise location. That delay was significant. By the time rangers reached them, Gwen was unresponsive. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. She was declared dead at the scene. The investigation confirmed 3 contributing factors: the instability of the thermal crust in that area, the fact that she had crossed the boardwalk barrier into an unsecured zone, and the delay in rescue caused by the off-trail location. The recovered footage showed the collapse happening in stages, not a sudden full immersion, but a progressive failure that began the moment she shifted her weight. Rangers retained the original memory card as part of the case file, and only a short segment was later reviewed internally for training purposes. The thermometer was found nearby. It told her the surface temperature and nothing else. And honestly, that's the detail that stays with me. The next case flipped Gwen's story on its head for me, because this time the victim wasn't trying to be careful at all. She was pushing a kitchen appliance past the point anyone should, with a camera rolling right next to her. It was March 9th, 2016, and the apartment was the kind of small suburban unit you find all over central Ohio. Thin walls, a galley kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people to pass each other, and a countertop that had seen better years. It was a weekday evening. The windows were closed. The overhead light buzzed faintly above the stove. Nothing about the setting suggested anything was about to go wrong. Lisa Brood was 27. She worked part-time at a local retail shop and spent most of her free time building a small home cooking channel online. She had around 3,800 subscribers and had been stuck at that number for months. Her last few uploads had underperformed, and she had been openly frustrated about it with her boyfriend, who was 29 and usually handled the camera for her. She was funny, self-deprecating, and had been watching bigger creators pull huge numbers on extreme cooking stunts. She wanted in on that. She had started telling people she was one viral video away from breaking through, and you could hear in the way she said it that she believed it. The idea for this video was something she had been calling a kitchen stress test. Push a pressure cooker until it did something dramatic on camera. A cooker behaving normally isn't dramatic, so she had to make it misbehave. That meant two deliberate choices. First, she filled the pot with a thick bean mixture well past the marked fill line. She knew the line was there. She ignored it because a full pot would build pressure faster. Second, she took a small piece of aluminum foil and covered the pressure valve. Every time I think about this one, I land on the foil. A person who wanted to be safe doesn't reach for foil. A person who wanted a viral clip does. That one piece of kitchen material is the whole story. Her boyfriend set up about 3 feet from the stove, camera in hand. She clicked the lid into place and turned the burner on. For the first minute or two, nothing happened. That quiet is the part that bothers me most. It gave her time to stop, and she didn't. Then the cooker started vibrating, earlier and harder than a healthy cook should. She stayed where she was. Steam began leaking from the edges of the lid instead of the valve, hissing in uneven bursts that didn't sound like a normal release. She leaned in closer to get a better shot. The gasket began to deform, bulging outward between the lid and the pot. The lid started rattling in a way anyone who has used one of these before would recognize as wrong. That was the last warning she was going to get. Instead of stepping back, she leaned in further for a narration shot. Her face was now less than a foot from the lid. The gasket failed on the side facing her. It didn't explode. It vented laterally. A concentrated jet of superheated slurry forced out through the gap at close range. The jet hit her face, neck, and chest directly. She gasped, and in gasping, she pulled the steam directly into her airway. She recoiled backward, but the hot mixture had already soaked through the front of her shirt, and fabric holds heat against skin in a way that extends a burn well past the initial contact. Her skin reddened, and blisters formed within seconds. Her voice went hoarse almost immediately. She started coughing, the deeper, strained kind that comes from an airway that has already been injured. Her boyfriend called for help right away. When responders arrived, she was conscious but struggling to speak. During transport, her breathing worsened. The swelling in her airway was progressing faster than the team could manage. They attempted to secure her airway, but the internal tissue had already swollen past the point where intervention was going to work. She went into respiratory failure shortly after arrival. Resuscitation was unsuccessful. Investigators reached a straightforward conclusion. The overfilled pot combined with the blocked valve had forced pressure to escape through the weakest point, which turned out to be the gasket seal pointed directly at her. Cause of death was listed as thermal injury to the airway, not the external burns. The foil was still on the valve when they recovered the cooker. Her channel saw a sudden spike in traffic in the days after, followed by comments being disabled and the page eventually taken down entirely within the year. Lisa's case left me with a specific kind of frustration, the kind where the fix would have cost nothing. That same frustration hit me twice as hard reading the next file, because this time the person holding the danger was a teenager, and what he put in his mouth was already lit. It was July 4th, 2015, and the backyard sat on the edge of a quiet Texas suburb where the grass had gone dry and brittle from the summer heat. The air still held the weight of the afternoon sun. Fireworks were already going off in the neighborhood, the low thuds of mortars a few streets over, the occasional whistle and pop closer in. A small group of teenagers had gathered near a concrete patio with a cooler of cheap beer, a phone on a tripod, and a box of consumer-grade fireworks they had picked up from a roadside stand earlier that week. Corby Vish was 19. He worked part-time at a local auto shop and spent most of his weekends filming content with his friends for a small prank channel they had been building together. He had around 3,300 subscribers. Not much, but enough to matter to him. He was the kind of guy who liked being the one who went first, the one who took the hit for the joke. His friends laughed loudest when he did, and he had built a small identity around being the person who didn't flinch. That identity is the thing I keep coming back to, because it's what walked him into this. The plan that night was a version of a stunt they had done before. Hold a lit firecracker in the mouth briefly, then spit it out before it blew. They had pulled it off twice in earlier videos using weaker fireworks. This time, the box they had was a step up in power, with faster fuses. Nobody measured the difference. Nobody tested one first. They had all been drinking for a couple of hours by the time the camera went on, and their timing was already off in ways they couldn't feel yet. Honestly, the thing that hits me hardest about Corby isn't the firework, it's the countdown. His friends added one for dramatic effect, and that countdown is what locked him in. He couldn't bail without breaking the bit, and at 19, breaking the bit in front of your friends feels worse than the risk. He lit the fuse and placed the firecracker between his teeth. The countdown started. Somewhere around 3, he tried to say something. Maybe a joke, maybe a cue for the throw, and that small movement cost him a fraction of a second. The fuse on this one was burning faster than the ones they had used before. He wasn't working with the margin he thought he had. The firecracker detonated inside his mouth before his hand ever reached it. The damage was immediate and catastrophic. His jaw, teeth, and the soft tissue of his mouth took the full force of the blast at point-blank range. He dropped straight to the ground, hands moving to his face on reflex. Heavy bleeding started within seconds, and his airway began filling with blood and displaced tissue. The sounds coming from him were not speech. They were the wet, gurgling attempts at breathing that happen when the airway is compromised from the inside. His movements were brief and uncoordinated. His friends froze. The video recovered later showed several seconds of stunned silence before anyone moved. That delay mattered. One of them finally ran for a phone while the others tried to turn him onto his side, but nothing they could do at that moment was going to hold back what was happening inside his airway. Responders arrived to find him without effective breathing, with massive facial trauma and ongoing hemorrhage. They attempted resuscitation on the patio and continued en route. The damage to his airway made a clear intervention impossible. He was pronounced dead at a small local facility a short time later. Investigators reviewing the footage and the scene confirmed the cause of death was airway obstruction combined with severe blood loss, not the detonation itself. The firework had functioned normally. The faster fuse, the alcohol, the countdown, and the half-second delay from speaking were what closed the gap. The phone used to record the stunt shut off during the initial chaos, leaving the final seconds of the clip truncated when it was later reviewed. In the days after, the remaining fireworks from the same box were collected and turned over, never used, still sealed in their original packaging. After sitting with Corby's case for a while, I needed a story that wasn't about an audience at all. The next one gave me that, in a way. A woman climbing a streetlight at night, chasing a single shot, with no crowd to perform for and no countdown running. It was September 22nd, 2018, and the stretch of roadside in a quiet part of coastal California had emptied out hours before. The businesses along that block had closed for the night, the traffic had thinned to the occasional passing car, and the streetlights were doing most of the work the sun used to. It was a warm, clear night, the kind of quiet where footsteps carry. Mona Gloff was 26. She worked a daytime office job in the city and ran a small urban exploration channel on the side. She had around 4,700 subscribers and had spent the last 2 years building that audience on night climbs, abandoned buildings, and rooftop shots that most people wouldn't attempt sober. She was deliberate, not chaotic. She scouted ahead, brought the right people with her, and had a reputation for being one of the more careful creators in her space. What she didn't have yet was a shot that felt like a breakthrough. A larger creator in her niche had posted a streetlight climb a few weeks earlier that pulled serious numbers, and Mona had been chasing something similar ever since. She had been scouting poles in the area for 2 weeks. She was with 2 people that night, a cameraman, 28, and a spotter, 24, who watched for cars and passers-by. The target was a streetlight pole about 30 feet tall. Here's the first off-ramp. She had picked that specific pole because its base access panel was open. Someone had left the interior partially exposed, and you could see bundled wiring through the gap. For someone in her niche, that detail made the shot. Second off-ramp. The spotter pointed at the open panel and said something about the wiring being a bad sign. Mona waved it off. Third off-ramp. Her hands were slightly damp from the warm night air. She wasn't wearing gloves. She wasn't wearing anything protective at all. Most of the people I cover miss the warning sign. Mona didn't. She saw it. Her spotter named it out loud, and she made a conscious choice to treat it as a feature instead of a threat. That's not carelessness. That's something else. And I still don't have a clean word for it. She started up the pole, using the seams and brackets to work her way up. The first 15 feet went quickly. At 20 feet, she paused to reset her grip. The metal was cool and slick from the evening air. She kept moving. At the top, she stabilized. She was close to 30 feet up, balanced on a pole no wider than her forearm, with one arm wrapped around the housing for support. She took a breath and shifted her weight to free her right hand for the shot. That's when her fingers slipped into the compromised section of the housing, the gap near the top, where the internal wiring was no longer properly insulated. She made contact with an energized line. The shock caused an involuntary full-body jerk. Her grip broke on reflex. The muscles in her hands had already let go before her brain could tell them not to. She fell from somewhere between 25 and 30 feet. Mid-fall, she tried to grab at the pole, but the disorientation from the shock meant her reach was uncoordinated. She didn't catch anything. The back of her head and upper shoulders struck the pavement first. There was no movement after impact. The cameraman hesitated before approaching. He wasn't sure if the pole itself was still live or if touching her would complete a circuit. That hesitation cost under a minute. Responders arrived and confirmed severe head trauma. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The utility crew who inspected the pole the next day confirmed the wiring had been damaged in a prior incident and never properly secured. Investigators concluded the electrical contact triggered the loss of grip, but the cause of death was blunt force trauma from the fall itself, not electrocution. The camera remained running through the fall, capturing the entire sequence in a single continuous shot that was later reviewed during the case reconstruction. Now the next file is at the edge of an active volcano, with nothing between her and the drop but a shifting cloud of gas. It was May 11th, 2017, and the crater rim in this part of Hawaii sat under a pale, heavy sky. The wind was shifting in small, unreliable gusts. A thin plume of volcanic gas drifted out of the caldera, bending in one direction for a few seconds, and then bending back. The ground along the rim was a mix of hardened lava rock and loose volcanic debris, the kind of surface that looks stable from a distance and isn't. Warning signs were posted at regular intervals along the edge. Darcy Flitt was 31. She worked remote customer service jobs between trips and funded her life almost entirely through a small travel channel she had been running for about 4 years. She had around 4,900 subscribers, and her whole brand was built on the idea that you didn't need money to see the world. You just needed to be willing to go places most people wouldn't. She was resourceful, independent, and proud of doing her trips completely solo. No crew, no companions, just her, a phone, a small tripod, and whatever she could carry in a backpack. That independence is the thing that matters here, because it meant there was no one standing next to her saying the plume was shifting the wrong way. She had been planning this trip for months. Volcano content had been pulling well for creators in her niche, and she had framed this stop as the centerpiece of her next upload. She wanted a wide shot of herself at the rim with the caldera visible behind her. The official viewing areas were crowded and didn't give her the composition she wanted, so she moved past them. She positioned herself about 10 to 15 feet from the edge, close enough for the framing, far enough that she believed she could react if something went wrong. She set her tripod on uneven ground. She noted, in footage recovered later, that the wind kept changing direction. She noted it, and she kept setting up anyway. The footage picks up her adjusting the camera angle and stepping slightly closer to the edge for a better frame. Then the wind shifted, hard and fast, pushing the gas plume directly across her position. She started coughing almost immediately. Her eyes began watering, and her vision went partially cloudy. On the footage, you can see her turn away from the rim and raise one arm toward her face, trying to cover her mouth while she moved back from the edge. Her breathing became audible and erratic. She was disoriented, not unconscious, but not fully tracking where her feet were going either. She stepped onto a patch of loose volcanic rock while backing up. Her foot slid out from under her. She stumbled forward instead of back, which put her onto the sloped terrain near the rim rather than away from it. She went down onto her hands and knees and then slid several feet. Her head struck the ground with enough force that she stopped moving almost immediately. Her body came to rest partially on the incline, close to the edge but not over it. The footage shows minor movement for a short time after, then nothing. Other visitors several hundred feet away noticed her down and alerted rangers. By the time they reached her, she was unresponsive with severe head trauma. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators reviewing the recovered footage confirmed the sequence. The gas exposure impaired her vision and coordination. The loose rock caused the fall. The cause of death was blunt force trauma from the impact, not gas inhalation on its own. A partially packed backpack left near the setup point still contained extra batteries and a second memory card that were never used. Just when I thought I had seen the full range of ways a shot could go wrong, one last file landed on my desk that reframed the whole list. This one wasn't about subscribers or exposure or solo judgment. It was about a comedian, a kangaroo, and a joke that was never going to land. It was August 3rd, 2018, and the rural outskirts of Queensland were dry, flat, and mostly empty. The kind of place where the nearest paved road was a 15-minute drive away, and the nearest hospital was further than that. The morning was warm, but not hot yet, with visibility clear across the open scrubland. A wild kangaroo had been spotted earlier standing near a dirt pullout, a large male, upright, alert, watching the group of visitors who had parked nearby. He wasn't moving away. That detail matters. Tala Spoke was 23. She ran a small comedy channel online, mostly short skits filmed with friends on a tight budget. She had around 3,600 subscribers and had been slowly building a reputation in her niche for committing to a bit harder than anyone else in the frame. If the joke called for her to get tackled, fall off a bike, or take a pie to the face, she did it. That willingness was her brand, and it was the reason her small audience kept coming back. She was out that morning with two people, a cameraman, 24, and a driver, 27, who had grown up in the area and knew how the local wildlife behaved. The driver was the one who spotted the kangaroo and pulled over, but he wasn't pulling over so they could interact with it. He was pulling over so they could get distance shots from inside the vehicle. He told Tala directly that male kangaroos this size were territorial, and that approaching one on foot was not something you did. He was specific about the kicks. He had seen them before. Tala had already decided what the skit was going to be. She was going to do a comedic boxing match with a wild kangaroo. She put on a pair of light gloves. She got out of the vehicle. She walked out to roughly 6 feet from the kangaroo. The animal hadn't moved. It was already balanced upright on its tail, which for a male of that size is not a neutral posture. It's a posture that signals it has decided how it's going to respond if whatever's in front of it comes any closer. She raised her fists for the camera. She took one step closer. The kangaroo still hadn't moved. Its weight was already shifted back onto its tail, its front limbs hanging loose, its hind legs loaded. For a second, the two of them just stood there. Her in a boxing stance, him in the stance his body goes into right before it kicks. She didn't see the difference between the two. Then she threw a light jab in its direction. More gesture than contact, the kind of swing you throw for a joke. The kangaroo reacted the way kangaroos react. It braced on its tail and delivered a single hard, double-leg kick, driven by both hind legs at once. The impact landed on her abdomen and lower chest. She was roughly 23 years old and maybe 130 pounds. The animal in front of her was heavier, stronger, and built to deliver exactly that strike. She went backward off her feet. The ground behind her was hard-packed dirt with embedded rock. She didn't fall cleanly. She stumbled 2 or 3 steps trying to stay upright, couldn't, and went down backward. The back of her head struck the ground. She moved briefly after impact, a few uncoordinated attempts to push herself up. Then the movement slowed. Then it stopped. The kangaroo did not pursue. It stood where it was for a few seconds, then moved off on its own. Animal behavior specialists who later reviewed the footage noted that the response was defensive, not predatory. The animal had done what it was warning her it would do. Her driver ran to her first. Cell service in that area was poor, and it took several attempts to reach emergency services. By the time responders navigated the dirt roads out to the location, she had been unresponsive for close to 30 minutes. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death was severe head trauma from the impact with the ground. The kangaroo's kick had started the fall, but the ground had finished it. In the weeks after, her channel remained online but shifted into inactivity, with friends posting a single pinned message before uploads stopped completely.